Now, unless there's a really big shock tomorrow, Liz Truss looks set to win the Conservative leadership race and become the next Prime Minister. One of the most important relationships for whoever the new Prime Minister will be is going to be with the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, someone Liz Truss has described as an attention seeker who should be ignored. Well, we can talk now to Nicola Sturgeon to get her take on the leadership race, but also, of course, on the cost of living crisis that is hitting people across the United Kingdom. Thank you so much. It's great to have you on the first show back after the summer recess. Now, it's almost certain that Liz Truss is going to be announced tomorrow as the next Prime Minister of the UK. Do you think she'll be an improvement on Boris Johnson?
The hard question to start with. Look, time will tell. It's obviously the case that Liz Truss and I don't agree on very much politically, but I'm a firm believer in giving anybody who's coming into the office of Prime Minister a chance to prove themselves, and I will certainly do my best to build a constructive working relationship with her. Remember, she will be, if it is indeed Liz Truss tomorrow, she will be the fourth Prime Minister that I've had to deal with in my time as First Minister, and despite my differences with David Cameron, Theresa May, perhaps less so with Boris Johnson, but it wasn't for the want of trying, I've managed to have decent working relationships, and I'll certainly try to do that with Liz Truss as well. I think everybody will want to see what she is going to do. She faces, as all of us do right now, immense challenges. I hope the very first thing she does in office is cancel the looming increase in energy prices, the increase in the energy price cap, and deliver some very substantial help to individuals and businesses. The one thing I would say is that if she governs as she has campaigned over the summer, she will be a disaster, not just for Scotland, but for all of the UK. But let's hope that's not the case, because this is a very serious time for the UK and it needs very serious and very purposeful leadership.
You say if she governs as she has campaigned, she will be a disaster. Why do you think that?
Well, because she has campaigned on the very, how can I say this politely, niche priorities of 100,000 members of the Conservative Party, you know, focusing on things like tax cuts that would benefit the very richest, when it is ordinary people across the country who desperately need help to feed their children and heat their homes. You know, there's been a focus on what the Conservatives would describe as woke politics, you know, rhetoric that looks as if it is rowing back on the moral obligation we all have to tackle the climate emergency, which, as it happens, is also the right thing to do over the long term to lower energy prices and improve energy security. So the obsessions of a tiny number of Conservative Party members are not the right priorities for the country. So I think it won't take very long to see whether she is going to govern as a Prime Minister with a focus on the real priorities of the country or not. I think that will become very obvious and evident perhaps within the first 24 or 48 hours of her premiership. So let's hope she chooses the responsible course and stops pandering to the margins and the Conservative Party.
It does, as you say, feel like we're going to find out the direction of travel pretty soon. She's written in the Sunday Telegraph today saying she's going to have immediate action on energy bills, but also, of course, talking an awful lot about tax cuts. Are you concerned that if she does push ahead with tax cuts, as we believe is likely, to say the least, what impact that could have on the spending envelope for Scotland? And whatever happens, do you think you're going to have to do an emergency budget in response to the new Prime Minister?
Well, we're undertaking an emergency budget review right now, and we are committed to setting out the outcome of that effectively in an emergency budget within a couple of weeks of whatever budget or fiscal event the new Prime Minister has. Now, we don't know for sure when that will happen or what form that will take, but our working assumption is there will be something of that nature by the end of September. I certainly think that is necessary. And to your question, yes, I am profoundly concerned about the potential impacts of that on the Scottish Government's budget, and I know my counterparts in Wales and Northern Ireland will have the same concerns. I mean, right now we are working within budgets that are effectively fixed and finite. They are not rising in line with inflation, but the inflationary pressures are bearing down on our budget as they are on the household budgets of families across the country. Any move, and this is a real risk, that would cut our budgets within this financial year would obviously be of profound concern, because it would have big implications for the National Health Service, for local authority budgets, for every aspect of our spending. You know, one of the things we've been trying to do within that finite budget is help those who most need it. We have established a Scottish child payment support that doesn't exist anywhere else in the UK, currently giving £20 per week per child to the lowest income families. We have plans to increase that to £25 a week. Real tangible help at this time of crisis, and we don't want anything that reduces our ability to do other things to help. But my other concern about tax cuts is that they target those who are already the best off. You know, many people who are really struggling right now already don't pay income tax and wouldn't benefit from a cut there, and wouldn't benefit in the same way that richer people would from a cut in national insurance, for example. So this is a time to focus on what is really needed. Freeze energy prices first and foremost. Come to an arrangement then between government and the energy companies about how that is paid back over a longer period of time. Effectively spread and share the burden of the soaring gas prices. Help businesses, because businesses don't even have the limited protection of an energy price cap. Get more cash into the pockets of those who need it most, and free up more spending ability for the devolved government so we can do more to protect public services and public sector workers right now. So there's a package that a new Prime Minister could bring to bear, and it would deliver real help and relief to millions across the UK.
I guess just to put the counter-argument on tax cuts is that Liz Truss and those around her would argue that cutting taxes helps boost growth, which would then help the economy through that sense. You mentioned as well energy bills and action on energy bills. Liz Truss has said she would take immediate action on that. There are reports that that could include more drilling licences in the North Sea. Would you be happy to see more oil and gas taken from the North Sea to try and increase the energy supply?
But we've got to make a careful and just transition away from oil and gas. That's an imperative for the planet right now, but actually it is the way that we work towards greater energy security and lower energy bills. We are undertaking right now in the Scottish Government our own energy review, looking at the requirements over the longer term. But you know, what is more important, I think, than continuing to explore for more oil and gas is that we fully support the renewable energy transition. So we've just had an auction round in the North Sea, which has given the initial go-ahead to up to 28 gigawatts of offshore wind energy. That's the future. That also gives us enormous potential in green hydrogen to help fulfil our own energy needs, but also can be a big export potential. So that's what I said earlier on. We need to support oil and gas as it transitions, and there's lots of workers in Scotland dependent on that industry right now. So I'm not complacent about that, but it is the wrong priority if you take your eye off the renewables revolution and the renewables transition, and that's what worries me, as well as irresponsible talk about fracking, for example. Let's focus on making sure that we harness our renewables potential, which fulfils all of these important objectives in the longer term.
Now, I just want to talk a bit about independence. You have said that you want to hold another Scottish independence referendum in October 2023. Liz Truss, of course, during the Hustings campaign has said, if I'm elected Prime Minister, I will not allow another independence referendum. So she's been talking pretty tough on it. If Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister, do you think that does impact the chances of you holding another referendum?
Well, look, whether Scotland has a referendum, whether Scotland does or does not vote to be independent, it really shouldn't be up to any UK Prime Minister. Actually, it shouldn't be up to a First Minister either. This is about a fundamental principle of democracy. Now, there is going to be a Supreme Court hearing in October next month that will look at whether or not the Scottish Parliament has the legal ability to legislate for a referendum, regardless of what a UK Prime Minister says. I hope the outcome of that will be positive, but of course that is a matter for the court. What cannot be escaped here, whatever Liz Truss or any Prime Minister says, is the democratic aspirations of the people of Scotland. You say, I want to have a referendum next year. I do. But that's the basis on which I was elected First Minister last year. There is a democratic mandate. And my message to Liz Truss is not to say that I think I can persuade her to support independence. She is opposed to independence. She's entitled to have that view. But make the case for the continuation of the Union. I will make the case for independence and let the Scottish people decide. It is not a sign of strength on the part of Liz Truss to talk about blocking a referendum or, as some reports today suggest, gerrymandering the rules for a referendum. That is a sign of fundamental weakness and a lack of confidence in her case for the Union.
Let's talk about, you mentioned there about, as you put it, gerrymandering the rules. This is the reports in the Sunday Times that the Truss team want to introduce a new law that would mean a referendum could only take place. So if a referendum takes place, at least 50% of Scotland's entire electorate would have to vote to leave the Union for it to happen. So in other words, not a simple majority as we've seen in the EU referendum or in the previous referendum. For something as significant as breaking away from the Union, is that something that you would accept?
No, because it is a changing of the basic rules of democracy that we have all abided by for our entire lifetimes and long before that. Can you imagine the furore, the literal foaming at the mouth that we would have had from the Conservative Party if MD had suggested that for the Brexit referendum? You cannot, just because you fear losing a democratic contest, it's not an excuse or doesn't make it acceptable to try to rewrite the rules of democracy. That's my point here. There has never been a positive case for the Union made by those who put forward that case. In 2014, they tried, and got away with it in 2014, to scare people in Scotland. I remember back then there was all sorts of scare stories about all sorts of things, but including that our energy bills would go up.
Rather than getting too involved into the rights and wrongs of the arguments,
you've asked
which
me a
have been well rehearsed, I'm quite interested to know about how a referendum could actually take place, because another part of the Sunday Times report is saying that the UK government wouldn't consider allowing another referendum unless there was evidence for more than a year that at least 60% of voters wanted one. If you look at the recent polls, I think we can have a look at the YouGov tracker poll for support for independence, and you can see that it's actually waned recently. Do you think that this perhaps suggests that, at a time when people in Scotland are worried about turning their heating on, food banks are saying that people aren't picking up potatoes because they don't have the money to boil them? Do you think people are worrying perhaps that independence is a distraction from the cost of living issues?
Well, it's not a distraction, and part of my job is to persuade people of that, because part of the reason we're in this mess right now is because we're not independent, and therefore we don't have the levers to try to navigate our way out of that. If Scotland was independent, we could already have passed an emergency budget. We'd have powers to reform the energy market to deal with some of the underlying causes of this. I wouldn't, as First Minister of Scotland, be sitting here right now, as we were discussing earlier on, profoundly concerned in case a Prime Minister in London that Scotland hasn't voted for is about to take decisions that cut our budget even more. We wouldn't have a position where we have to accept that people are reliant on food banks. Some of the action we have taken, the Scottish Child Payment that I mentioned earlier on, we could build on that because we'd have access to more levers and resources. Actually, independence is much more necessary when we're dealing with crisis, because it gives you more levers to navigate your way through and onto a better future. But the point I wanted to complete, it wasn't about getting into the substance. You asked me about all of these different stories about attempts on the part of UK governments to gerrymander the rules. Only politicians fearing the democratic outcome would ever contemplate that. Let's have the debate on substance, where I and my colleagues will make the case for independence, for Scotland becoming like other independent countries across the world, able to navigate our own future, and let people like Liz Truss make the case for the Union. But then, democratically, let the people of Scotland decide. That's how democracy works. It's how democracy should always work.
You, at the beginning of the interview, you were talking about your relationship with other previous Prime Ministers. And I just want to touch upon your personal relationship with Liz Truss, because obviously personal relationships do matter in politics. And I think I can just play you what Liz Truss said at a hustings in August about you when she was asked. Let's have a listen.
I feel like I'm a child of the union, that I really believe we are a family and we're better together. And I think the best thing to do with Nicola Sturgeon is ignore her. She's an attention seeker, Seb. That's what she is.
She's an attention seeker. That's what she is. Are you really going to be able to work with Liz Truss?
I will do my best, and it is up to Liz Truss to decide whether she wants to work with me. Let's put the personal insults to one side. Again, coming back to the argument I made about if you're confident in your case, you don't need to try to block democracy or gerrymander democracy. Similarly, I'd say to Liz Truss,
just to come in, because I do think it's perhaps
you don't make.
Just to come in, because I do feel it is a two-way thing with you guys, I have to say. You recently said that the main thing Liz Truss wanted to talk to you about when she met you, I think quite recently, was how she could get into Vogue. I've just been interviewed by Vogue. You said that was the main thing she wanted to talk to me about. I remember it because we were there at the world's biggest climate change conference in Glasgow, and that was the main topic of conversation she was interested in pursuing. Just talk me through what happened there.
I was asked a question if I'd had a conversation with Liz Truss. It's the only sort of lengthy conversation or meaningful conversation I can recall having with Liz Truss, so I answered the question about what we talked about. Look, I'm perfectly willing to not to put our political differences aside, because in a democracy you have political debates, but I will, as I did with David Cameron, Theresa May, to some extent Boris Johnson, although I think most people would recognise that was more difficult, to build a working relationship. I'm not perfect. I'm not saying that I'm blameless when those relationships go through difficulties, but I will try to build that relationship. But the point I was making is that her comment about ignoring me is in a similar vein to trying to block democracy. You don't make a problem that you fear you can't solve properly go away by simply ignoring it. You engage in a democratic debate. And I'm a politician. I mean, part of your job as a politician is to get attention for yourself, your policies, your values. I mean, I don't mean this pejoratively, but I've never looked at Liz Truss and thought that she was some kind of shrinking violet. And that's not a criticism. In politics, that's part of the job that you have to do. But the ignoring point is perhaps more fundamental because, look, some people in Scotland vote for me and my party. Some people don't. Some people like me. Some people loathe me. That's democracy. But I am the democratically elected First Minister of my country. And that means quite a lot of people have voted for me. And when they hear Liz Truss saying I should be ignored, you know, what they hear is that Scotland's voting choices should be ignored, or that Scotland should be ignored. And I tell you something, I think people in Scotland, you know, are really getting increasingly fed up with Tory Prime Ministers that, remember, we don't vote for and wouldn't vote for if we'd had the chance with Liz Truss, trying to ignore and talk down Scotland. And that is one of the many reasons why I think increasing numbers of people in Scotland will support Scotland being an independent country, so that that important relationship with the rest of the UK is on the basis of equality.
OK. Now, we are out of time, but there's just one thing I would like to ask you. It's something that I've spoken to you about before. I know it's something that you feel strongly about. This week, my colleagues Liz Bakes and Agnes Chamber have been looking into allegations of sexual misconduct and the culture in Westminster. And really, this crosses across all different parties, what they've been looking into. One former SNP staff member told them the attitude in Westminster is, if it's not rape, it's OK. Of course, there have been allegations about members of your own party. The Commons watchdog found Patrick Grady sexually harassed a junior member of staff. He, of course, has since quit the SNP. Are you happy with the way that your party has dealt with these allegations of sexual misconduct?
No, I think we can be better, and I'm not going to shy away from that. I think every party, every organisation dealing belatedly, I think, because too often in the past these are things that have been swept under the carpet. I think we've all got lessons to learn. I said in the context of the the Patrick Grady case that we had lessons to learn, and that is the case. So we are looking at our procedures as a party, as parliamentary groups, all of the time. We've gone through a very painful process as the Scottish Government because of issues you and I have spoken about previously, and some of the scrutiny and the pressure I've had over the past few years on these issues, in particular the highest profile one of these, is because I've not been prepared simply to sweep these things under the carpet. So no, I don't think we are as good as we need to do, and that's something I take seriously, and I'm intending to ensure that we do get better so that women or men who feel that they have been the victim of sexual harassment or sexual abuse feel confident in coming forward and feel confident in the processes that they then use.
OK, thank you very much. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland.